You walk into a room. The lighting is soft. The people around you are kind. There is no raised voice, no tension in the air, no obvious threat anywhere you can detect. And yet something in you is watching the door. Something in you is already cataloging the body language of the person across from you. Already planning, already calculating. You do not know exactly why. You only know that calm does not feel like safety. Calm feels like the silence before a door slams, the pause before a voice changes. The moment the weather shifts and you have not yet found shelter, this is one of the most quietly painful realities of growing up in an environment where safety was never guaranteed. Not the dramatic scenes, not the obvious chaos, the quiet, relentless, invisible labor of a child who never got to simply exist, a child who learned, long before they had words for it, that the world was a variable, and that their job was to manage that variable at all times. Here's the paradox at the center of this video. The very mechanisms that kept you alive as a child, the hypervigilance, the emotional self-erasure, the scanning, the hiding did exactly what they were designed to do. They worked. You survived. But survival architecture is not the same as living architecture. And when those same systems are still running at full capacity in your adult life, in your relationships, in your body, in your quietest moments, they are no longer protecting you from anything real. They are protecting you from a threat that is already past. They are running a program written for a house that no longer exists. What follows is a psychological portrait of people who grew up without a reliable experience of safety, and what that does, precisely and permanently, to the human mind. When most people imagine an unsafe childhood, they picture the most extreme versions: visible violence, severe neglect, acute crisis, and those experiences are real and devastating. But the psychology of chronic childhood unsafety is far broader and far more ordinary than those suggest an unsafe childhood. In the psychological sense, does not require a single dramatic event. It can be built entirely out of inconsistency. A parent whose moods were a weather system with no forecast, a home where love was conditional and silence was strategic, an environment where a child's emotional needs were either dismissed, ridiculed, or simply never acknowledged. It can look like a perfectly functioning household from the outside. It can look like a family that never missed a school event, but never once asked how you were feeling inside it. Emotional unsafety is not always loud. Often, it is the quietest form of deprivation. The scale of this is staggering. According to data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, approximately 64% of adult Americans report having experienced at least one adverse childhood experience, what researchers call an ACE, before the age of 18. These include abuse, neglect, household dysfunction, parental substance use, and domestic violence, among others. Critically, approximately 1 in 6 adults reports having experienced 4 or more of these categories. The original Kaiser Permanente ACEs study, conducted by researchers Vincent Felitti and Robert Anda in the 1990s, found a powerful dose-response relationship. The more ACEs a person experienced, the higher their likelihood of chronic health conditions, mental illness, relationship dysfunction, and behavioral challenges in adulthood. The implication is not that most people are damaged. The implication is that most people are carrying something they were never taught to name, and that this unnamed thing shapes the texture of their inner life in ways they often mistake for personality. To understand why childhood unsafety produces such durable behavioral patterns in adulthood, you need to understand what it does to the developing brain, because it does not merely create memories, it restructures architecture. Bessel van der Kolk, the psychiatrist and trauma researcher whose decades of clinical work produced the landmark book The Body Keeps the Score, argues precisely this: trauma does not simply live in the mind as a painful narrative. It lives in the body, in the nervous system, in the automatic physiological responses that operate below the level of conscious thought. When a child experiences chronic stress or threat, the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, becomes disproportionately sensitized. Studies in developmental neuroscience, including research published in Frontiers in Psychiatry, demonstrate that early adversity dysregulates the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA axis, which is the system responsible for producing and regulating cortisol and adrenaline, the hormones that activate the fight-or-flight response. In a child whose environment is consistently unpredictable, this system stays activated. The prefrontal cortex, the region associated with rational thinking, impulse regulation, and long-term planning, is effectively suppressed when the threat system is running at full capacity. The brain is prioritizing survival over cognition. That is exactly what it is supposed to do under genuine threat. The tragedy is what happens when that threat is not a single event, but a childhood, when the brain spends its entire developmental window in a state of sustained readiness, and then carries that readiness into a world that no longer requires it. This is not a weakness. This is a brain that was an exceptional student of its environment. The problem is that the environment changed, and the curriculum did not. Imagine your body as a smoke alarm that was installed in a kitchen, where something was always burning. Over years of real smoke, the alarm became extraordinarily sensitive, so sensitive that it now goes off when you make toast. The alarm is not broken. It is, in fact, extraordinarily well calibrated to the kitchen it was built in. But it is no longer living in that kitchen. And it does not know that this is the neurological reality of hypervigilance, and it is perhaps the most pervasive and least understood trait of adults who grew up in chronically unsafe environments. They do not choose to scan rooms. They do not decide to track the micro-expressions of the people around them. They do not elect to feel a low-level sense of dread in environments that are objectively peaceful. Their nervous system does it automatically, because that is what it was shaped to do. Research psychologist and neuroscientist Stephen Porges developed what is known as Polyvagal theory, a framework that describes how the autonomic nervous system responds to cues of safety, danger, and life threat. According to Porges, the nervous system is constantly and unconsciously scanning the environment for signals, a process he calls neuroception, in individuals whose early environment was chronically threatening. The neuroceptive baseline is set to threat detection by default. The social engagement system, the state in which humans can connect, rest, and feel genuinely safe in the presence of others, becomes difficult to access because the nervous system never fully received the developmental experience of reliable safety. Allow it to default there. This is why peace feels suspicious. It is not an irrational fear. It is a nervous system that has genuinely never learned what sustained safety feels like, and that reads the absence of threat not as rest, but as a temporary gap in the threat cycle. They are not waiting for something bad to happen. Their body is already certain it will, and is simply waiting to be right. There is a particular kind of social intelligence that develops in children who grow up needing to manage the emotional atmosphere around them. It is not talent. It is survival. When a child's emotional safety depends on correctly reading an adult's mood, when the difference between a calm evening and a frightening one rests on the child's ability to detect a shift in tone, a tightening of the jaw, a silence that carries weight, that child becomes extraordinarily skilled at reading other people. By the time they are adults, they can walk into a room and feel its emotional temperature within seconds. They notice the slight edge in a colleague's voice before anyone else does. They register the micro-expression of disappointment on a partner's face in the fraction of a second before the partner has consciously registered it. Themselves, this is remarkable. It is also exhausting. And it comes at a devastating cost. They are almost entirely blind to their own internal state. They have spent so long monitoring the external world for threats that the internal world became essentially foreign territory. They know if everyone around them is okay, long before they have any awareness of whether they themselves are okay. Psychotherapist Pete Walker, in his foundational work on complex PTSD, coined the term fawn response to describe this pattern, and it is important to understand what fawning actually is, because it is often misread as simply being nice or agreeable. The fawn response is a trauma adaptation in which a person learns that the safest way to navigate a threat is to appease it to become emotionally invisible, agreeable, and anticipatory of what others need, so that those others never become a source of danger. As Walker describes it, the fawning person merges with the wishes, needs, and demands of others, erasing the boundary between where they end and where everyone else begins. This is distinct from the freeze response, which we will examine later. Fawning is active. It is a continuous, effortful performance of safety through self-erasure. And underneath all of that management and performance, there is often a quiet, rarely voiced longing for someone who will see through all of it and simply fight for them, not because they are weak, but because they never were. there is a detail that appears repeatedly in accounts from adults who grew up in unsafe environments, a small, specific behavior that almost no one talks about publicly, and that almost everyone who carries this history recognizes immediately when they encounter it. They hide, not metaphorically, physically. They are drawn to small, enclosed spaces. They feel inexplicably at ease, sitting in closets, in cars parked in quiet streets, under weighted blankets pulled completely over their heads, in the corners of rooms with their backs to the wall. The rest of the world might find this eccentric or hard to explain. To them, it is simply what the body needs to feel like it can stop performing. The psychology here is precise and heartbreaking. For a child in an unpredictable or threatening environment, the experience of being unobserved is the experience of being safe. When no one can see you, no one can direct anger at you, demand something from you, or change their mood in a way that becomes your emergency. The small, enclosed space is the one environment the child could fully control, the one place where nothing unexpected could happen, because nothing could enter without warning. Von der Kolk's research emphasizes the role of the body in carrying traumatic memory, what he describes as somatic experience. The body does not distinguish between a memory of threat and the actual experience of threat. When the nervous system detects environmental cues that resemble the original unsafe environment, the body enacts its original protective responses. The gravitational pull towards small, hidden spaces is the body voting for the only safety strategy it was ever taught. It is not regression. It is a memory, and it is trying, with genuine dedication, to take care of you. Speak in the language of need. This is not a personality type. This is the internalized logic of a child who learned that having needs was dangerous. John Bowlby's attachment theory, developed through decades of clinical and observational research, establishes that a child's sense of self-worth and safety is inseparable from the responsiveness of their early caregivers. When a child's needs are consistently dismissed, punished, or ignored, they do not conclude that their caregiver is failing them. They conclude that they are asking too much, that they are, at some fundamental level, too much. They learn to shrink, to need less, to perform emotional self-sufficiency so convincingly that everyone around them, including eventually themselves, believes it. There is also a generational and cultural dimension here. In many families and cultural contexts, particularly those shaped by cycles of hardship, emotional suppression is not just modeled, it is explicitly taught. Children are told that visible emotions are weakness, that needs are burdens, that the appropriate response to difficulty is to keep moving. These messages are rarely malicious. They are often the inherited coping strategies of people who themselves never felt safe enough to need anything. The wound is passed down not through cruelty alone, but through the absence of permission, the permission to take up space, to feel what you feel, and to survive the feeling without having to hide it. There is a particular loneliness that belongs specifically to this experience, a loneliness that is made stranger and more disorienting by the fact that it exists inside a life that, from the outside, looks socially full. They are the friend everyone calls first. They are the coworker who remembers birthdays, who checks in, who holds everyone else's emotional reality with extraordinary care. They are described as warm, reliable, present, and in a real sense, they are all of those things. But there is a wall, smooth, clear, almost invisible, and it sits at the precise point where warmth would become vulnerability. They offer closeness, but not exposure. They share stories, but not wounds. They are funny and engaging and generous, and they are managing, always, the exact degree to which people can see them, because what they learned, at a foundational level, is that being truly seen is not an act of intimacy. It is an act of risk. When conflict arises in a relationship, even minor conflict, even benign disagreement, many of these individuals experience what is known as the freeze response. It is critical here to distinguish this clearly from the fawn response discussed earlier. Where fawning is active, it is the effortful performance of agreeableness. Experience safety directly, in real time, until that experience becomes a new kind of memory. Attachment researchers also speak of what is called earned secure attachment, the documented phenomenon in which adults who experienced insecure or disorganized attachment in childhood develop a coherent, trusting relationship with their own history and with other people through sustained experience of reliable, emotionally responsive relationships. This can happen in therapy, It can happen in deep, consistent friendship. It can happen in any relationship where showing a fraction of the real self is met not with punishment, withdrawal, or contempt, but with curiosity and genuine care. The nervous system learns through experience, and it is never, at any age, finished learning. If any part of this video felt like someone describing a map of your interior, if you recognized yourself in the people, reading, the apologies, the hiding, the glass wall around your most honest self, then there is something you should know that is not a strategy, not an instruction, and not a promise of how much better everything will become if you simply do the right things. The question this video leaves with you is not, how do I fix myself? The question is quieter and more fundamental. What would it feel like, just as an experiment, just for a moment, to be in a room with kind people in soft light, and let your nervous system believe, even briefly, that nothing is coming? If you found something true in this video, leave a comment below, not to perform insight, but because sometimes the first step toward feeling less alone is simply saying out loud, I recognize this. And if you know someone who carries this quietly, this might be the thing they did not know they needed to hear today.